Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My German is very, very bad. It's been years since I've really spoken any German outside of high school class, so I'm going to be speaking in English today. I apologize. Before we start, a couple of things. I love to see smiling faces, so if you're okay, I would love for you to turn your video on so I can see your reactions, see even if you're not smiling, that's okay too. I want to see you drinking beer, making me jealous. So if you want to put your video on, Randy's got something there. If you want to put your video on, please do so. I would love that. I will take questions toward the end of the presentation. I'm not really going to watch the chat that closely, but I'll have John kind of watch the chat to see if there's anything I need to stop about. And a little bit more, I'd like to know kind of what my audience is made up of. So if you could go over to the chat and write what you do, what's your job title? Are you a UX designer? Are you a Scrum Master? Are you a developer? I just kind of like to know what we are all doing. So if you can pop over to the chat. Okay, we have an Agile coach. Nils is an Agile coach. How about anybody else? What's your job role, or what do you want to do? Maybe you're in between things right now. Okay, a UX consultant, Andy. Anyone else want to put in the chat what they do? Do we have any? Okay, we have a developer. Do we have any more developers or Scrum Masters or product owners? Anything? Okay, go ahead and oh, I'm a researcher and a designer too, as you may know. Okay, so great. Thank you for sharing that. So let me go ahead and get started and tell you a little bit about me before we get too deep. My name is Jen Blatz, and I'm a user experience designer and researcher at Fidelity Investments in the United States, in a state called Texas. And I also co-founded a meetup group called UX Research and Strategy. We started in Dallas, but once COVID hit, we went global. So we are an international meetup group. All of our events are online. We actually have an event tomorrow. We have a little networking extravaganza, I call it. So it's an opportunity to meet other professionals. We are having to meet up at 5 o'clock Central Time. So I believe you're 7 hours ahead. So kind of late for you, midnight. So if you wanted to join us, we would love to have you join us. We are not on Meetup. We are on Eventbrite. So if you're interested, I can put the link in the chat, and we would love to have you join us for our events. But enough about that. Let's get back to the talk. So let's first define what user experience is. So what does that mean to you? Does anyone want to come off of mute and kind of tell me what they think UX means? Could you define it for me? Or you can write it in the chat. Anyone have any idea what that means? Everybody's pretty quiet today. Now, I know I saw some UX folks here on the call, so I'm guessing you kind of have an idea what it means. Anybody want to give a definition? Okay, Randy has one. Everything a customer goes through before, during, and after using a product, not just the UI. Anyone else? Okay, Nils, do you want to come off of mute and tell us what your two different levels are?
I try to remember. I don't know the names, but was kind of like more the seeing the product as whole, and then more about how the design should be.
Okay, that's good.
But kind of
Anyone
like
else?
the different layers they're working on.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So it sounds like we got a couple different perspectives there. And you're right. UX is a couple of different things, right? And I think that many people think of user experience usually means happy customers. So as you can see from this graphic, UX encompasses many things, like you mentioned, visual design, like you said, Nils, and it also has research and strategy, the information architecture, or the how a site is organized, or how you navigate a site. A lot of times that's the navigation. And it's all balancing all of those things with the business goals. So here's a more formal definition. User experience is every aspect of a user's interaction with a product or service, including their perception of it and how it makes them feel. So unlike what most people think UX is, which is kind of the visual design, it's really so much more than that. It's also the experience the customer has rather than just the pretty parts of it. So let's take a second to talk a little bit about what UX is not. And UX is not about making things look pretty. It's not, as we say in the United States, lipstick on a pig. Good design is improving the interface as well. And it's mostly not front-end development. It can be if your job is a UX designer and front-end development, but a lot of times those roles are split. And we must do research to know how to improve things. Just like developers investigate a language or a platform to make the best selection on a foundation to build a product. And UX researchers and designers research things about users to make sure that they're building the right products in the right way. So sometimes being a UX designer is a lonely job. So some people on this call here today said they're not UX designers. Maybe they're developers or Scrum Masters. And a lot of times the ratio of designers to developers is quite small. So UX designers need to make sure that we're acting in a way that the users can be heard in the process. That's why we're here, to be the voice of the user so that we can build better products. So companies who invest in user experience are finding a return on their dollar. I'm using dollar because that's the currency I use. Just think about this in euros, your currency. And if that doesn't speak to business, I don't know what does. So it's said for every dollar that companies invest in user experience, they see $100 return on investment. And UX has proven to contribute to a company's success time and time again. And here are a few examples that you can see on this slide. So has anyone here heard of the $300 million button story? Anybody familiar with this story? Okay. So though the company involved in the story has never really publicly been confirmed, legend has it it's Amazon. And back in the day, there was a time when you could not buy something on Amazon as a guest. This study was done a long time ago. So you were forced to create an account to purchase something on Amazon. Now, how many here have an Amazon account? Everyone, pretty much, yeah. We all do now, and it's a no-brainer. Back when this research study was done, not everybody had an Amazon account. So this guy named Jared Spool, who's a kind of famous UX person, did some research with people who like to shop online. And he learned that people can be intimidated when they're forced to create an account. They didn't like the idea of sharing their information or being forced to create that account. And based on this research, Mr. Spool suggested the company add a checkout as a guest button. And maybe you've seen this on other websites. I know I've done this recently, and maybe I think I bought some flowers, and I was like, yeah, I don't really want to set up an account. I'm just gonna just check out as a guest. Well, this was great because finding this out because he did real research with people to understand real shopping behaviors online. So the company added that checkout as a guest button, and the rest is history. Amazon added this button, and the company saw an increase in revenue of $300 million in that first year. That's a pretty amazing number. And granted, this was probably 20 years ago, so think about that's a lot of money back then. So as you can see, doing a little bit of research, and talking with customers can have a huge benefit. Getting the valuable insight directly from the source's mouth can be a huge moneymaker too. Happy customers means more money, and that means happy businesses too. So let's take a look at what actually goes into the UX process. First, I would say there's three major phases: research, design, and validation. We start with asking, what problem are we trying to solve? We shouldn't start with, what can our app or website do for the customer? Because that doesn't necessarily solve a problem by thinking about it that way. There are many steps a person should take before diving into a final solution or the design. And there's a lot that UX designers can do before we even get into code. We want to make sure that we're building the right thing. So there are some preliminary steps that UX can take to get ahead before front-end development. Now, granted, depending on the project, we might not do all of the things listed here. But generally speaking, we do like to do research to understand the problem, the business needs, the user's needs, and to get our head around. And then we move to design. And by design, this could be rough sketches or wireframes, and then move up to mocking up pages. And then we test our design. Again, this can all be done without the fabulous developers wasting 1 second of building something in code. That might not work. This is one of the biggest benefits of user experience working ahead of developers in the Agile process. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that a bit later. So specifically, what does a UX designer do? Like I said before, we research the people, the product, and the industry to understand the problem. From research, we then recognize the things that need fixing. So this is when we start exploring solutions. Then we can recommend and mock up design solutions and start communicating what we think might work. And this is also when we heavily work with our development team and our product partners to better understand what's feasible and technically possible, because that's really important stuff for UX designers as well. We don't want to just design something that we think looks great if it can't technically be implemented. That's not good. Once we have some designs we think will solve the problem, then we create a prototype and test that with real users. Testing and validating our design solutions with users is very important. Yes, developers work on QA and making sure things work technically. That is also very important. But UX tests with people to make sure that users can actually use the product. So that, in a nutshell, is what user-centered design process looks like. And for us, the user is the central point of all this information, this insight, and our solutions. So why do we actually need to do user research? Well, don't business partners know what our customers want? Don't the salespeople get all the complaints and know what people are complaining about? Not exactly. Trust me, I've had many interesting conversations with stakeholders and executives who told me that they knew what the customer's needs were. And then when I went out and actually talked to the customers, the executives were way off from what the people actually wanted. And this is why you do user research with actual users and not based on HIPPO assumptions. Have you heard of HIPPO? If you've heard of HIPPO, give me a thumbs up either in the reactions or yeah, HIPPO stands for highest paid person's opinion. And a lot of times they have a lot of things to say, but they don't always have the knowledge to back it up. So because of their high paycheck, it seems like they might be right. But be careful of this species. Though they have good intentions, they may not approach the situation and offer a solution with the customer in mind. Sometimes they push the business agenda. And that's what's valuable about user research, is you find out about that customer perspective. Okay, so why do we do user research? Well, when I conduct research, I use the scientific method. My goal is to disprove or prove a hypothesis. Everything I test is an assumption until I'm proven otherwise. Conducting user research stops the guessing. It stops people talking about assumptions. We go out there and find real answers straight from the user's mouth. And despite what many companies get wrong, we are not the user. We know too much about the company and what's going on behind the scenes to be real users. We have too much invested in the company to have an honest blind eye to the process. We know how the sausage is made. So there are many methods to design solutions and get feedback that do not require code. As you can see here, I use this sketch of a design to get feedback from users. No code is involved here, clearly. As the UX designer, all they need to do is have a prototype at the level of feedback that they need. For the way something is written or placed on a page, a sketch with, like you see here, with marker and paper will be just fine to get that level of information from a customer. It doesn't need to be in perfect code to get some feedback. When we talk to users with these early versions of a prototype, then we can flesh out some early problems without wasting developers' time. And developers love it when we're not wasting their time, right? So this is a picture of me. I'm at the bottom left-hand corner under the screen, and I'm in a usability lab testing a page design with a participant. She's the blonde lady here to the right. What I want to point out here is I'm running a usability test with a prototype that did not involve any code whatsoever. The design was created in a design tool called Sketch, and we upload it to a website, and it's a clickable prototype that simulates going through a website. This woman was none the wiser that this was not a real website. She had no idea. So what I'm trying to show here is there are ways UX designers have a few tricks so we can create designs, do some usability testing, get some user feedback, iterate the designs if needed, and move the design forward, all without a single line of code being written. And what does that mean for developers? It means it saves them a ton of time. How much time? Well, let's just say a lot. Rework by developers is very time and resource consuming. As a UX designer, I value their time and I don't want to waste any of it. Developers can be more effective because they're not wasting their time fixing problems like you see here. Look at these percentages. These are insane. How much time is wasted by developers fixing things, building the wrong thing. This should not be a thing. UX figures out what does not work from the user in those early prototypes and designs and tests, and then the developers don't have to go back and fix problems. This sounds pretty lean to me, huh? So building the right features means research has been done and we validated our assumptions, and now we know we're building the right thing that users really want. Okay, so now you have a better understanding about what user experience is, and that it's much more than just prettying things up and putting lipstick on a pig. And a lot of it's hoping to not waste developers' time. And next, I'm going to talk about how Agile fits in with, or UX fits in with Agile. But before I do, this is a good place to stop and see if anybody has any questions specifically about UX before I move on to the next part. If you want, you could either type it in the chat, or if you want to come off on mute, that's great too. Does anybody have any questions? No?
There was a question from Randall about the $300 million button. Like, how do they colorate the 300 million to adjust their change?
What was it, Randy? You want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my question was, okay, so we can talk about the value of UX, but there's like all these different things going on. And when you're doing a scientific experiment, it's nice to isolate it and be like, the only thing that changed is this variable. But like in the real business world, there's all kind of changes going on the website. So when you say that Amazon made $300 million more that year and they changed a button. Like when we're doing UX, a bunch of different things might be changing. So how do you sort of make sure that the UX gets the right value placed on it for what you do when a bunch of different things are changing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And a lot of times it's not as cut and dry to measure as it was in that example, because that example was we added a checkout as a guest button. So we knew that funnel of where all those sales were coming from. So every sale that went beyond that, they would be able to track that, right? There was a specific measurement behind that. But it's true, Agile UX can be very difficult to measure, especially because it's not one-to-one or very specific touch point or action that changes that the conversion or time on task or something like that. I think that's a part of the challenge for us as UX people to show the value of UX, because it's not always a tangible number increase or something you can point at really specifically.
Yeah, like if you advertise a product a lot, well, you might get more sales, but then, it's just, I don't want to sidetrack this too much. I was just, curious if you had any words of wisdom on how to make sure that they see that it has the right amount of value so that the managers are like, oh yeah, we got to invest the time in UX, not just be like,
I think a lot of it has to do with qualitative research where you're talking to a smaller number of customers and getting their feedback since the change has been made. Mm-hmm. And you're finding out, yes, I can do this. It's easier to do this. I'm spending less time on this. This language is clear. You can find out some of those things in your usability testing and your research before you even launch the product. You can find out if your changes are changes for the better or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Let's go on then. Okay, so you have a good understanding of what UX is. Now let's talk about Agile, which a lot of you probably know about. So let's talk about the foundation of Agile. And this is the Scrum team. And I know most of you probably know what a Scrum team is, but for those who might not be sure, let me quickly define it. Scrum is an Agile process that allows us to focus on delivering the business value in the shortest amount of time. And so now that we have a good understanding of that, how does that relate to user experience? So there are a lot of similarities in the 12 Agile principles and some factors that drive UX designers to create good user experiences for the customer. Both want to satisfy the customer. Both work together and collaborate. Both approach it with simplicity in mind. And both understand the need to adapt and change as we learn new things. So UX is not really far off from the ideas of Agile, right? But for some, it's really not clear how UX fits into the whole Agile process. On a Scrum team, there are basically 3 roles. There's a product owner, there's a Scrum master, and then there's your cross-functional developers, which is multiple people. So where's user experience? Well, when the Agile Manifesto was written, it didn't take into account user experience, researchers and designers. It just wasn't a thing yet. So we need to adjust our teams and our processes to include UX in our team and our sprints. It's really that simple. So what does that actually look like? Well, the UX team, their activities such as research, creating wireframes, some of that visual design, are usually at least 2 sprints ahead of schedule. So granted, some of this size of the design and the research, it kind of depends on if it's really big or small. And just because user experience is a couple of sprints ahead of developers, that does not mean there shouldn't be constant collaboration and communication. UX design should definitely involve the developer to review the UX designs and to share what they're learning about in research. There should be communication all along. If they're like I said, if they're doing research, share with the developers what we're learning so they know why we're building or thinking about building things the way that we are. And if we're doing design, I will share my sketches with a developer, and so that they can understand my initial thoughts. And we should start to have some conversations about, is this technically feasible? Can we build this? Even in those early stages of sketching. So here's an example of an overlap of design and development per sprint. So while we're working on these things, developers should be, like I said, collaborating and working with design and research to understand what the customer needs are. So see how research is like maybe 2 to 4 sprints ahead? Again, this depends on the size of the project and what type of research needs to be done. So if it's a brand new project and we really need to do some foundational research and really understand, what's going on here, then that might be more sprints ahead. But if it's like a usability test of something we're making a change on that already exists, that might only be a sprint or 2 ahead. So it kind of depends on how big the effort is. But UX should really be ahead of development, again, depending on the size of the project or the effort, 1 to 4 sprints ahead. So let's take a look at this graphic for a second. This is showing you how sprint work might work across different projects. So look at how the work would spread across sprints on several projects that are in flight at the same time. So on here, each color represents a project. And you can see how the work could be staggered across sprints, with UX research and design working ahead of development. So again, how far ahead depends on the size of the effort of what needs to be done. So let's look at the green project. In sprint 7, the whole project is getting started. We have the kickoff and some early discovery work, and the UX research is really kicking off then. Then in sprint 8, research was continuing, but the UX design could also be getting started in this sprint. UX could be doing some early usability testing on some sketches or wireframes. Note that no code is happening yet in sprint 8. In fact, in sprint 8, the development team is rolling off another project, the purple project. Then in sprint 9, more UX design is happening. UX is mocking up pages, doing usability tests, and validating their design assumptions. And we're collaborating with the development team about what we're learning about from our users and how the designs might go. Sprint 9 is where the developers are collaborating with UX designers even more and starting to establish that design, front-end code, and that architecture. So you can kind of see how UX starts working within sprints, right? Does anybody have any questions about this? No? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't find where to raise my hand on
Okay.
Zoom.
Yeah,
Sorry
go
for
ahead.
that.
Yeah.
I have one question from your experience. My name is Vasilis. Sorry for that, not introducing myself. Could the sprint's duration in this slide be a 1 week sprint? Is it possible, or is it like from your experience like that? Okay, we definitely need like a 2 weeks.
I have generally worked in a 2-week sprint cadence. So I was building this off in probably a 2-week mindset. It is possible that this could be week sprints, but it might be a little tough to complete all of these, depending on the design team size. If you have multiple people working on these efforts, perhaps this could be done in a 1-week sprint, but I was thinking this was more of a 2-week sprint cadence.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Comments? No? Okay. So as we talk about this intermingling of UX into sprints, I want you to keep a few things in mind. First, include UX in all your Agile ceremonies. This is so important. As a UX designer, when I'm attending a meeting, I might pick up on an opportunity to do some research or mock up a design for a future project that we're starting to talk about. If UX is not there in that meeting to hear these opportunities, the rest of the developers might not know that they should tell us. They're not thinking about it from a user experience point of view. They're thinking about it from a development point of view, of course, because that's their role. So having the UX team there to represent and kind of be part of that conversation is a great way to get the UX embedded into the team. So let me tell you a little story. I was working at a company that owns a bunch of animal hospitals as the only UX designer and researcher. I just happened to be sitting in on a meeting, and the product owner was telling me we were going to release a new doctor app, and it was going to be developed in a couple of days. And I was like, what new doctor app? What are you talking about? I'd never even heard of this thing. And he said, oh yeah, the mobile app we're creating where doctors will be able to look up a pet's information before they step into a room. So a veterinary doctor's office, multiple rooms, and there might be, 3 or 4 rooms that the doctor goes between. And so before they step in the room, they kind of want to know what's behind that door. So I said, okay, so what are you going to put in this app? And the product owner was listing off this long list of features. We're going to put their whole medical history, the notes from the previous visit, the vaccinations they'd had, the owner's contact information, a whole bunch of stuff. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How do you know they need all that stuff? And he just shrugged and he's like, well, we just know. I'm like, yeah, my spidey sense went off. I was like, no, I don't think you know. No. I said, just give me a couple of hours to call some doctors and just find out if you're on the right track. And he was like, no, we don't have time. We're going to be starting to code this up in 2 days. And I was like, just 2 hours. Just let me get on the phone and call a few doctors. And he's like, oh, okay, fine. So I get on the phone, I call doctors, and I ask them what they need. And they told me they need 2 things before they step into a room. One is, what kind of animal is it? Is it a cat, a dog, a fish, a bird? What is it? And 2, what am I stepping into? Is it a routine visit where they're just getting vaccines? Or has this cat been run over by a car and it's a mess? They just want to get their mind around what they're stepping into. Just those 2 things. All the rest of that stuff, they can open on the medical record when they get into the room. So by me doing some quick research, calling up 5 doctors in a couple of hours across the US, I eliminated 75% of the features that they were going to put in this app. So that was huge rewards because we finished the app weeks earlier than it was going to take. We created it way under budget because it wasn't as big as it needed to be. And that is the power of user research. Okay, so back to how to integrate UX into your Agile process. I just had to share that story. I love that story. Randy? Yeah.
So what was the reaction of the person who said, no, we need oodles of features? Were they happy or were they huffy? Like, where did they fit in?
That particular
because
product
ego,
owner,
as we know in UX, we have to try to put our ego aside, but not everybody's built that way.
That's true. And he and I had a pretty push-pull relationship in a good way. So we had a good relationship where he was used to me pushing back and he was open to that. So I was lucky in the sense that I was like, I spun it like, look, I'm making this so much easier. You're going to get this done faster. You're going to get it done cheaper, and you're going to look awesome because you are building what they want now and you're not loading it with a bunch of stuff. So it's going to be really lean too. And he was like, oh yeah, I like that. Making him look good for corporate.
Good, yeah. Okay, that's so one way to package it.
Yeah, so he was all over that. Faster, cheaper, looking good, used, like usability wise, good stuff. So he was pretty pleased. So yeah, I was lucky that he took it well, but he would have been a fool not to. But you're right, Randy. Some people could be like, feet in, heels in, I'm not changing anything, right? So I was lucky. So like to the story I just told you, the key is to plan ahead and give time to UX for research and design and testing. These aspects are really important. And for great software development, they really should not be omitted. So the next one is like use collaboration tools and be face-to-face with you when you can. This is an Agile principle. And that's Agile principle number 6, right? Well, that's all well and good, but this age of COVID, we're not really having the opportunity to be face-to-face. So we are doing the best that we can with Zoom meetings and whatnot. But the point is to really have that face time, in a sense, working with your developers and getting that communication and that relationship built. And I do this multiple times a day when I'm working with my team. And so for those who might be not UX folks here on the call, maybe you're a developer or an engineer, it sometimes can be tough to work with UX people. Like, that's working with anybody. It can be a challenge. And we all must make an effort to understand the requirements, the constraints, and the pain point the other person has to do in their job. So when I work with developers, I like to establish a relationship, I like to make it easier to communicate around real issues. And then we can negotiate. We can negotiate features and get away from that, no, it can't be done. You know, when you have a real relationship, you're going to talk about things and work together and not just say no all the time. And so that's really important. So like the second principle of the Agile Manifesto, we need to welcome change. So if things are not perfect at first, don't be afraid to iterate your Agile process when you're implementing UX into your process. It's going to take a little bit of a learning and adjustment. That's true, and that's okay. But you need to be patient and flexible and iterate as needed. I'm sure that for those here on the call today that are actually practicing Agile, you're probably doing it slightly less than perfect, right? Everybody has a little bit of a nuance, a little bit different way of doing things than the pure method. And it would not be a UX presentation without some reference to Apple or Steve Jobs. It's a requirement for a UX designer. I'm just kidding. It feels like it. Randy rolls his eyes. So I want to share this quote with you. And maybe some of you have seen it before. Design is not just what it looks like and it feels like, but design is how it works. And that's what it means to be in UX design and not to just pretty things up. It's more than just that lipstick on the pig. It's more than that visual design or just the UI. It's how it works. And it's making sure that things work right for the user. And the UX designers and developers, they need to make sure that they're building the right things and together, building them together so that they can work really well for the customer. Thank you very much. That's all I have to talk about today. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Thanks, Nils.